Sarah Matthews stood before her classroom of third graders, maintaining a smile that masked the storm raging inside her. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting warm rectangles on the worn linoleum floor, but she felt nothing but cold. Her mother Clara's funeral had been just 3 days ago, and here she was, teaching as if her world hadn't imploded. "Miss Matthews?" Little Amy Rodriguez's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Are you okay? You look sad." Sarah blinked back tears, touched by her student's concern. "I'm fine, sweetie. Let's focus on our multiplication tables." She turned to write on the whiteboard, her hand trembling slightly. The numbers provided a temporary escape from the crushing weight of reality, the mounting bills, the mysterious phone calls, and most pressingly, the unexpected visitor who had shown up at her door last night. James Morrison, their next-door neighbor for the past 15 years, had appeared on her doorstep with an envelope full of IOUs in her mother's handwriting. The total was staggering, $75,000. "Your mother borrowed this money for your father's treatment," he'd said, his usually friendly face hard with determination. "I expect repayment, Sarah. I've been patient, but now that Clara's gone." The memory of his words made her grip the marker tighter. Her father's cancer treatment had drained their savings, but she'd had no idea her mother had borrowed such a substantial sum. What made it worse was Morrison's thinly veiled threat: "It would be a shame if the school board found out about your family's financial situation. Teachers should be more responsible, don't you think?" The lunch bell jolted Sarah back to the present. As her students filed out, she sank into her chair, pulling out her phone to check her bank balance for the 100th time. Her teacher's salary barely covered her rent and utilities. The inheritance from her mother consisted mainly of a small house filled with memories and a mountain of medical bills. That evening, Sarah drove to her childhood home, now eerily quiet without her mother's presence. She'd been avoiding going through Clara's things, but Morrison's visit had forced her hand. There had to be something: documents, bank statements, anything that could help her understand the situation. In her mother's home office, Sarah methodically went through drawer after drawer. Most contained ordinary household papers, utility bills, recipes, old greeting cards. But behind a loose panel in the bottom drawer, she found a stack of bank statements. As she scanned the pages, her blood ran cold. The transactions told a story that made no sense. Regular monthly transfers to an account under the name Elena Martinez, dating back 3 years. The amounts weren't huge, but they were consistent, $2,000 every month, like clockwork. Sarah's father had been supposedly receiving treatment at Memorial Hospital during that time, but these transfers went to a private account. With trembling fingers, Sarah Googled Memorial Hospital's billing department. "I need to verify some payments for Robert Matthews," she said when someone finally answered. He was receiving cancer treatment there from 2020 to 2023. The response hit her like a physical blow: "I'm sorry, but we have no record of a patient by that name during that period." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. If her father hadn't been at Memorial, where had he been? Who was Elena Martinez, and why had her mother been sending her money? The questions multiplied like cancer cells, eating away at everything she thought she knew about her family. A text message from Morrison interrupted her spiral: "I expect an answer about the repayment by the end of the week. Don't make me take this further." Sarah stared at the bank statements until the numbers blurred. Her mother, always the family's moral compass, had been hiding something massive. Her father's whereabouts during his supposed treatment were a mystery. And now she had a debt collector breathing down her neck, threatening her career. She reached for her phone again, scrolling to her father's number. He'd moved to Arizona after her mother's diagnosis, claiming the dry air would be better for his health. Now she wondered if that had been another lie. Before she could press dial, another text from Morrison appeared: "By the way, I have some interesting information about your father's activities during his treatment. Might be worth discussing face to face." Sarah's hand froze over the phone. The implications of Morrison's message were clear. He knew something about her father, something beyond the money. The walls of her childhood home seemed to close in around her, filled with photos of a family she was beginning to suspect had never really existed at all. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah stood outside her father's modest ranch house. She'd taken an emergency personal day, bought a last-minute flight ticket she couldn't afford, and now stood mere feet from what she suspected was another elaborate facade in her family's house of lies. Robert Matthews' truck sat in the driveway, desert dust coating its dark blue paint. Sarah checked the time, 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. Her father should be at work at the consulting firm he'd claimed to join after his recovery. She rang the doorbell, hearing it echo inside. No response. After 3 more attempts, she pulled out her spare key, the one her father had mailed after moving, just in case. The irony wasn't lost on her. The house was empty, but lived in. Coffee mug in the sink, mail on the counter, a jacket thrown over a kitchen chair. Sarah moved methodically through the rooms, her teacher's attention to detail now focused on uncovering her father's secrets. In his home office, the desk drawers revealed nothing suspicious, until she noticed the false bottom in the middle drawer. Her hands shook as she pried it open. Inside lay a stack of photos, letters, and what appeared to be birth records. The first photo stopped her heart. Her father, looking healthier than she'd ever seen him during his supposed cancer treatment, stood with his arm around a woman. Dark hair, warm smile, probably in her early 40s. They were on a beach somewhere, looking very much like a couple. The date stamp read August 2021, right in the middle of when he should have been undergoing chemotherapy. The birth certificate made her sink to the floor. Gabriel Martinez, born September 15, 2010. Mother, Elena Martinez. Father, Robert Matthews. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Morrison. Found anything interesting in Arizona yet? We should talk about Elena. And Gabriel. The bastard had known all along. Every monthly payment her mother had made wasn't for medical bills, it was child support for a half-brother Sarah never knew existed. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her father. Why did the security system alert me about someone in the house? Sarah, are you here? We need to talk. She heard a car pulling into the driveway. Quick footsteps on the porch. Sarah gathered the documents with trembling hands, shoving them into her bag. The front door opened just as she emerged from the office. Robert Matthews stood in the entryway, his face a mask of carefully controlled panic. Not the face of a man who'd battled cancer. The face of a man whose carefully constructed lies were about to collapse. You were never sick, Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. Mom knew, didn't she? That's why she borrowed money from Morrison, to keep your other family quiet. Sarah, honey, let me explain. Explain what? How you made Mom pay for your secret family while she worked herself to death. How she borrowed money she couldn't repay to protect your reputation. Your mother understood the complexity of the situation, he said, taking a step toward her. We had an arrangement. An arrangement? Sarah's laugh was bitter. She died thinking I believed in you. Thinking I saw you as some brave cancer survivor. When really, you were just a coward running between 2 families. You don't understand the whole story, he pleaded. Elena and Gabriel, it's not what you think. Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, you abandoned your sick wife to play house with another family. You let Mom empty her savings, borrow money she couldn't repay, all to keep your dirty secret. Her father's face hardened. Clara chose to handle it that way. I offered to tell you years ago, but she insisted on protecting you. She wanted to preserve your image of our perfect family. Don't you dare blame Mom for your lies. Sarah's voice cracked. Morrison is threatening my career over this debt. Did you know that? Did you even care what would happen to us after? A woman's voice from the doorway cut through the tension. Robert? What's going on?" Sarah turned to see the woman from the photo, Elena Martinez, standing there, keys in hand, concern etched on her face. Behind her stood a boy of about 13, dark-haired and lanky, with their father's eyes. "Gabriel, wait in the car," Elena said quickly, but the boy stood frozen, staring at Sarah with growing recognition. "You're in the photos," he said softly. "The ones Dad keeps hidden. You're my sister." The world tilted dangerously. Sarah grabbed the wall for support, her father's protests fading to white noise as she stared at the brother she never knew she had. A boy who shared her blood, who had grown up with a father's love while she built her life on carefully crafted lies. Her phone buzzed one final time. "Morrison again, time's running out, Sarah. Either pay your mother's debt, or everyone at Jefferson Elementary learns about your father's creative accounting. Including the funds he embezzled from his company to support his second family." In the harsh Arizona twilight, Sarah sat in her rental car, watching Gabriel and Elena disappear into the house with her father. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, her mother's voice echoing in her memory, "Sometimes love means protecting others from painful truths." Now she understood the weight her mother had carried, the burden of knowing, of choosing silence, of sacrificing everything to maintain a facade that was crumbling like desert sand through her fingers. The drive to her hotel was a blur. In her room, Sarah spread out the documents she'd taken, birth certificates, photos, bank statements. Each piece told a fragment of a story she was struggling to comprehend. A photo of Gabriel's 10th birthday party, her father smiling, Elena cutting cake. The date matched a week when Clara had been undergoing radiation therapy alone. Her phone rang, Elena's number, probably found in her father's contacts. Sarah's finger hovered over the decline button before surprising herself by answering. "I know you must hate me," Elena's voice was soft, tired. "But there are things you need to understand. About your mother, about everything. Can we meet?" An hour later, they sat in a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. Elena's hands wrapped around her untouched latte, her wedding ring catching the light, a simple band, nothing like the elaborate one her father had given Clara. "Your mother came to see me 3 years ago," Elena began. "She showed up at my door one morning, and I thought everything was over. But she wasn't angry. She was kind. She said she'd known about us for months, had hired a private investigator when she first suspected something was wrong." Sarah's coffee turned bitter in her mouth. "She never said a word. She made a choice," Elena continued. "She said Gabriel deserved to have his father in his life, that destroying your father's career with a scandal wouldn't help anyone. So she proposed an arrangement. Monthly support for Gabriel's education, keeping everything quiet. While she worked herself to death to pay for it," Sarah's voice cracked. "She remortgaged her house, borrowed money she couldn't repay." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I tried to refuse the money. But Clara was adamant, she said it was about giving Gabriel opportunities, not about me or Robert. She would show up sometimes, you know. At Gabriel's school events, watching from a distance. She said he reminded her of you at that age." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All those afternoons her mother had claimed to be at medical appointments or running errands, she'd been watching over her husband's secret son, protecting him while protecting Sarah from the truth. "The last time I saw her," Elena whispered, "she made me promise something. She said when the time came, I had to help you understand. That you deserved to know your brother, even if you couldn't forgive the rest of us." Sarah's phone buzzed with another message from Morrison. She ignored it, focusing instead on a new text, from Gabriel. "Dad showed me pictures of you graduating college. Mom says you're a teacher. I want to be a teacher too." The simple message cracked something open inside her. This boy, this innocent child caught in the web of adult deceptions, was reaching out across the chasm of lies and secrets. "Morrison knows about the embezzlement," Sarah said finally. Did you know Robert was stealing from his company to pay the support? Elena's face went pale. What? No, Clara always said the money came from their savings, from refinancing their house. He's threatening to expose everything unless I pay my mother's debt. But it's not just about the money anymore, is it? He knows about the embezzlement, about Gabriel. Morrison, Elena's voice turned sharp. James Morrison. The investment advisor. Sarah's head snapped up. Investment advisor. He's our neighbor, owns a landscaping company. Elena pulled out her phone, hands shaking as she pulled up an email. No, he managed some investments for Robert years ago. There was an investigation, something about misappropriated funds. Robert had evidence that could have implicated Morrison, but nothing came of it. I always wondered. The pieces started falling into place. Morrison's convenient loans to Clara, his knowledge of the secret accounts, his threats that somehow always seemed to reveal new information. He's been playing both sides, Sarah realized. He used Mom's desperation to get her to borrow money she couldn't repay, probably knew about Dad's embezzlement the whole time. He's been waiting for Mom to die, thinking he could pressure me into paying without asking questions. Her phone buzzed again, Morrison, demanding a meeting tomorrow. But now, looking at Elena's evidence in her own documents, Sarah saw the outline of a different story emerging. Her mother's careful record-keeping, the hidden bank statements, even the private investigators' reports, Clara hadn't just been protecting her family. She'd been building a case. I need to see those investment records, Sarah said, her teacher's instinct for patterns taking over. And Gabriel's original trust fund documents. Mom knew something was coming. She wasn't just paying support, she was leaving us a trail of evidence. Elena hesitated only a moment before nodding. Everything's in a safe deposit box. Clara made me promise to keep it all. As they left the coffee shop, Sarah's phone lit up with a text from her father. Morrison called. Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. Some secrets need to stay buried. But Sarah thought of her mother, silently watching her grandson from a distance, meticulously documenting every transaction, protecting both her children in the only way she could. Clara Matthews hadn't taken secrets to her grave, she'd left breadcrumbs for her daughter to follow. The contents of Clara Matthews' safe deposit box lay spread across Sarah's hotel room bed, 2 decades of carefully preserved documents telling a story of quiet sacrifice and careful planning. Each paper represented a piece of her mother's silent vigil, watching over both her children from the shadows of secrecy. Sarah's hands trembled as she read through her mother's private journal, discovered among the financial records. Clara's elegant handwriting filled pages with observations about Gabriel, his first school play, his love of mathematics, his kind heart. She'd been there for everything, a guardian angel her grandson never knew he had. I watch him sometimes, Clara had written, and see traces of Sarah at that age. The way he furrows his brow when concentrating, how his laugh bubbles up from deep inside. I hope someday they'll know each other. I hope they'll understand why I chose silence over truth. A soft knock interrupted her reading. Gabriel stood in the doorway, clutching a worn notebook. Dad's asleep, he said quietly. Mom said I could come talk to you. If that's okay. Sarah patted the space beside her on the bed, carefully moving aside the documents. He sat down, his lanky frame perched uncertainly on the edge, looking both younger and older than his 13 years. I found this in my room last year, he said, holding out the notebook. I think it's from your mom. My grandmother. Sarah opened it to find pages of math problems, carefully annotated in her mother's handwriting. Simple equations gradually progressing to more complex ones, each accompanied by clear, patient explanations. They would appear on my desk sometimes, Gabriel continued. When I was struggling with math. I never knew where they came from, but they always helped. Mom finally told me today, she said Grandma Clara was a math teacher before she retired. She was, Sarah whispered, recognizing her mother's teaching methods in the neat columns of numbers. She tutored kids for years. She always said every child deserves someone in their corner. Gabriel's next words caught her off guard. She came to my science fair last year. I saw her in the back of the auditorium. I won first place for my project on renewable energy, and when I looked up, she was crying. But she left before I could talk to her. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. She remembered her mother coming home that day, saying she'd been at a doctor's appointment. She'd seemed emotional, but Sarah had attributed it to the supposed medical news. "She was so proud of you," Sarah managed. "Every time she went to watch you, she'd come home and write about it in her journal. She kept everything, your school photos that came out in the local paper, programs from your performances. But why didn't she ever talk to me?" Gabriel's voice cracked. "Why all the secrets?" Sarah looked at this boy, her brother, and saw the same pain she felt reflected in his eyes. "She was protecting everyone," she said softly. "She thought if the truth came out, it would hurt too many people. So she found another way to be there for you. By hiding? By pretending she didn't exist? By loving you from a distance? By making sure you had opportunities, support?" Sarah paused, a new thought striking her. The monthly payments, they weren't just support. Mom was building a trust fund for your education. Everything's documented here, protected from Dad's financial dealings. Gabriel picked up one of the bank statements. "These numbers, they're coded, aren't they? Like a math puzzle?" Sarah looked closer. Her mother's careful notations suddenly took on new meaning. Clara hadn't just been documenting transactions, she'd been creating a paper trail that only a mathematician would recognize. "Morrison's investment records," Sarah muttered, pulling out another file. "Look at the patterns. Mom was tracking something bigger. The money Dad was embezzling, Morrison's involvement, she was building a case, but hiding it in plain sight." A text message lit up her phone. "Morrison again, meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Time to settle your mother's debt. Unless you want your father's creative accounting to become public knowledge." Gabriel stared at the message. Is he talking about the money Dad's been moving around? The stuff I'm not supposed to know about? Sarah turned to him sharply. "What do you know about Dad's accounts?" "I'm good with computers," he said hesitantly. "Sometimes I help Mom with the banking. I've seen Dad moving big amounts between accounts, using different company names. When I asked about it, he said it was complicated business stuff I wouldn't understand." Sarah's mind raced. Here was the missing piece, a witness to the financial manipulation, someone who could help decode Clara's mathematical breadcrumbs. Her mother had known this day would come, had prepared for it in her own brilliant, subtle way. As she hugged Gabriel goodnight, she felt her mother's presence around them both, the teacher, the protector, the quiet architect of their eventual reunion. Clara Matthews had left them more than evidence. She'd left them a path to justice, wrapped in the language of mathematics she'd spent her life teaching. Sarah's phone buzzed one final time that night. "Elena, Robert's destroying documents in his office. Whatever Clara left you, I hope it's enough. Because tomorrow, everything changes." Dawn painted the desert sky in shades of gold and rose as Sarah sat in her rental car outside Morrison's hotel. Her mother's coded ledgers lay in her lap, each page a testament to Clara's quiet resistance against the men who had tried to control their family's narrative. In the passenger seat, a small recorder hummed softly, a detail she'd learned from Clara's own meticulous documentation of every interaction. The previous night had been a blur of revelations. Elena had arrived at Sarah's hotel room close to midnight, carrying a laptop filled with years of Robert's financial records. Together, they'd pieced together a story that went far beyond simple embezzlement. "Your mother knew," Elena had explained, her voice thick with admiration. "She discovered that Morrison and Robert were running a sophisticated investment scheme through the company. Morrison would find vulnerable clients, Robert would manipulate the accounts, and they'd split the profits. Sarah thought of her mother, quietly tracking every transaction, encoding evidence in mathematical patterns that only a teacher would recognize. Clara hadn't just been protecting her children, she'd been building a case, waiting for the right moment when Sarah and Gabriel would be old enough to understand the truth. Now, watching Morrison's tall figure approach her car, Sarah felt her mother's strength flowing through her veins. She stepped out into the morning air, clutching her mother's journal like a shield. "I was beginning to think you'd run back to your classroom," Morrison sneered. "Ready to discuss repayment terms?" "Actually," Sarah replied, her voice steady, "I'd like to discuss your investment partnership with my father. Specifically, the Carter Widows accounts from 2019, or maybe the Peterson Retirement Fund from 2020. Morrison's facade cracked for just a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about." "My mother didn't just keep records of her loans," Sarah continued. "She documented everything. Every transaction, every client complaint that mysteriously disappeared, every account that was drained and refilled to hide the paper trail. Your mother was a desperate woman telling herself stories," Morrison spat. "No one would believe Dash." "The SEC might," Sarah interrupted. "Especially with Gabriel's evidence of the computer transfers, Elena's documentation of the shell companies, and Mom's mathematical encoding of every transaction you two tried to hide." Morrison's face turned an ugly shade of red. "You're bluffing. That boy doesn't know anything. He's 13, brilliant with computers, and has been watching his father's banking activities for months. Mom knew that too. Why do you think she insisted on paying for his advanced programming classes?" A flash of uncertainty crossed Morrison's face. "Robert would never let you dash." "Robert doesn't have a choice anymore," Sarah said quietly. "Elena's already submitted copies of everything to her lawyer. If anything happens to any of us, if you try to threaten my career or Gabriel's future again, it all goes public." Morrison stepped closer, trying to intimidate her with his height. "You'd destroy your own father." Sarah thought of her mother, silently watching school plays from the back row, leaving mathematical encouragement for a grandson she couldn't openly claim. "My father destroyed himself. Mom spent years protecting his reputation, paying his debts, hiding his secrets. She died making sure Gabriel would have opportunities, that I would have a chance at a career without scandal. I won't let you use her sacrifice to perpetuate more fraud. What do you want?" Morrison's voice had lost its edge. Sarah pulled out a document her mother had prepared years ago. "You'll sign over the loan notes to me. All of them. Then you'll resign from your position at the investment firm and leave town. If I ever see you again, if you ever try to contact my family." "You'll what? Run to the authorities? Ruin your family's reputation?" "No," Sarah said softly. "I'll finish what my mother started. Every client you've defrauded, every account you've manipulated, they'll all know the truth. Mom kept their information too, their stories. She was building a community of witnesses, Morrison. Did you really think she spent all those years just being a victim?" The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Morrison's carefully constructed world began to crumble. In her pocket, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Gabriel, "Dad's looking for the backup drives. But don't worry, I moved everything to a secure cloud account. Just like Grandma Clara's note said to do." Sarah smiled, feeling her mother's presence in the crisp desert air. Clara Matthews had taught her children more than just mathematics, she'd taught them the power of patient resistance, of protecting others, of turning pain into purpose. "You have until sunset," she told Morrison. "Sign the papers, pack your things, disappear. Or I release everything, to the SEC, to your clients, to the press. Your choice." As Morrison's facade finally shattered, Sarah thought of her students back home, of the lessons she could now teach them about quiet courage and extraordinary love. Her mother's last gift hadn't been evidence or escape, it had been the chance to rewrite their family's story, together. 1 year later, Sarah stood in her mother's garden, watching Gabriel tend to the rose bushes Clara had loved so dearly. The morning air carried the scent of blooming flowers and new beginnings. Inside the renovated house, Elena was preparing breakfast, the sounds of domestic life drifting through open windows. The transformation of their family hadn't come easily. After Morrison's departure, Robert had faced his own reckoning. The evidence Clara left behind had given him a choice: voluntary resignation and restitution to his victims, or public exposure. He'd chosen the former, though the journey to accountability had been painful for everyone involved. Sarah remembered the day she'd finally confronted him, not with anger, but with the quiet strength she'd inherited from her mother. "You taught me that love means protecting people," she told him. "But Mom showed me that real love means helping people face the truth, even when it hurts." Now, Robert lived in a small apartment across town, attending therapy and slowly rebuilding relationships with both his children. The process was messy, complicated by years of deception, but guided by Clara's posthumous wisdom. She'd left letters for both Sarah and Gabriel, sharing her hopes for their future and her vision of healing. "Your grandmother believed in second chances," Elena had told Gabriel one evening, as they sorted through Clara's teaching materials. "But she also believed in justice. That's why she left us the blueprint for both." The family business had been restructured, with Sarah and Elena as co-trustees of a foundation dedicated to helping victims of financial fraud. Clara's mathematical codes had helped restore millions to Morrison's victims, though the emotional damage would take longer to heal. "Miss Matthews?" Gabriel's voice pulled Sarah from her reverie. He held up a journal, its pages filled with Clara's handwriting. "I found another one. She wrote about the day I was born." Sarah sat beside him on the garden bench, their shoulders touching as they read together. Clara's words painted a picture of joy tinged with sorrow, of a grandmother's love constrained by circumstance but never diminished. "I watch him enter the world," Clara had written, "and I see the future in his eyes. Someday, he and Sarah will understand that family isn't built on perfect truths, but on how we handle our imperfect realities. They will learn, as I have, that love is not about maintaining appearances, but about maintaining connections despite our failures." Inside the house, Elena called them for breakfast. The kitchen table, once a symbol of divided loyalties, had become a place of healing. Photos of Clara now sat proudly on the walls, watching over their blended family as they navigated their new normal. "I'm presenting my research project next week," Gabriel announced over pancakes. "It's about patterns in financial data. The teachers say it could help other families identify fraud." Sarah smiled, recognizing their mother's influence in his choice. Clara's legacy lived on not just in their mathematical abilities, but in their commitment to protecting others from the pain they'd endured. That afternoon, Sarah taught her regular mathematics class, but with a new perspective. Each equation she wrote on the board carried echoes of her mother's coded messages. Each student struggling with a problem reminded her of Gabriel's hidden tutorials. Sometimes, she told her class, the most important lessons aren't about finding the right answer. They're about understanding the patterns that lead us there. After school, she visited her mother's grave, placing fresh roses from the garden beside the headstone. The silence held none of the anger or confusion of a year ago. Instead, it carried the peace of understood sacrifices and honored truths. "You were right, Mom," she whispered. "Love isn't about protecting people from pain. It's about giving them the tools to face it, overcome it, and grow stronger." As the sun set over the cemetery, Sarah's phone lit up with a text from Gabriel, "Found more of Grandma's teaching notes. She had lessons planned for both of us, years in advance. Want to work on them together?" Sarah smiled, thinking of her mother's patient foresight, her quiet resistance, her enduring hope. Clara Matthews had known that true healing wouldn't come from exposing secrets or punishing wrongdoing alone. It would come from rebuilding, from choosing truth over comfort, from transforming pain into purpose. Walking back to her car, Sarah passed young families enjoying the evening, children playing, parents watching protectively. She thought of all the quiet heroes like her mother, fighting battles no one could see, leaving breadcrumbs for future generations to find their way home. The Foundation's latest project sat in her briefcase, a program teaching financial literacy to high school students, helping them recognize and prevent exploitation. Clara's mathematical genius, once used to encode evidence of fraud, would now help prevent it. In her rearview mirror, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself and saw her mother's determination reflected back. They had all been transformed by Clara's final gift, not just the evidence that brought justice, but the example she set of how to love completely, resist quietly, and heal thoroughly. The evening light painted the sky in shades of hope as Sarah drove home to her expanded family, carrying forward her mother's legacy of protection through truth, strength through vulnerability, and love through understanding.